Welcome to the Monstrous Flesh podcast, where we explore the evolution and role of women in horror, as well as familiar tropes of the genre through a feminist lens. There will be spoilers in this episode, so if you haven't seen the film yet and don't want us to ruin it for you, pause this podcast and come back when you're ready for a deep dive into it. I'm Meg, one of your podcast hosts.
Hi everyone, I'm Clelia, the other host of the podcast.
And in this series, we're turning our attention to the representation of female monsters in horror cinema. And in each episode, we dissect one film that we feel fits the bill particularly well. And today, our film is Pearl. So, Clelia, would you like to give us a synopsis?
I'm going to try my best. For this one. Okay, so Pearl is a prequel to Ty West film X, and it was co-written by the director and Mia Goth, who plays the eponymous character and, of course, also stars in X and the upcoming third segment of the trilogy, Maxine. So, the year is 1918. The First War rages and a flu pandemic is claiming casualties on the home front. But Pearl has big dreams that extend far beyond her life of joyless drudgery on her parents' farm in rural Texas, while her husband, Howard, is off fighting in the war. Pearl wants to dance and plans to find her way out of Texas and into adoration and movie stardom. When she learns an audition at the local church, she realizes that this is her chance to escape her overbearing mother once and for all, and no one is going to get in the way of Pearl's dreams.
Da, da, da.
How's that? Exactly. Da, da, da.
Yes.
So, do you want to tell us why we chose this film?
Well, we chose the film cynically because it's current and we want listeners to listen. But less cynically than that, when we were just sort of discussing about us both going to see it, I know I thought, and I think you felt the same, Clelia, that this is a really good example of monstrosity in horror that is much more realistic, rather than it being, we've done werewolves, we've done vagina dentata, we're going to do mermaids, we're going to do all these things. But this is a monster that is much closer to home. But also, is she monstrous? She does monstrous things, but do we think that makes her monstrous? So I think it's an interesting one to discuss.
Yeah, super interesting. Do you mind if I tell the listeners, actually, because that's not the film that we were going to cover initially. We'd agreed on another film, and then late last week I got an excited text from Meg saying, "Have you seen Pearl yet? If not, go and watch it, and we should talk about it on the podcast." So I'm so glad you did, because kind of unpopular opinion out there, so don't come at me, listeners, but I wasn't a fan of X. I really wasn't a fan of X. I found it a little disappointing in its execution, although stylistically I thought it was great. So, and in that respect, I think that Pearl delivers big time, and that kind of reeled me in straight away watching the film. The cinematography by Elliot Rocket presents the world of Pearl in glowing Technicolor and gives us a storybook world full of potential. It's, you get those, bright green grass, a blood red farmhouse. It's giving Wizard of Oz. It's giving Disney princess vibes. In fact, in these early scenes, I don't know what you thought, but you kind of always expect Pearl to break into songs. Yeah. But then instead, her grasp around the pitchfork gets tighter, and Mr. Goose gets it straight away.
God,
and
Mr.
I kind
Goose.
of like that. I don't know. But this early scene really kind of got me hooked, and I thought, okay, this is a different type of film than X, and I'm there for it.
I mean, one thing I did notice actually, and I don't think this is too early in discussion to bring it up. One of the things I was struck by is how referential it is to other films. So obviously Wizard of Oz, and that's a comparison a lot of people have made. And I think, that sort of opening shot and even the sort of text that they use is very old Hollywood movie, and it all feels like really, bucolic and beautiful, and it's this farm and it's saturated in colour and it's got that real Technicolor vibe, which I love. I love that contrast to that with sort of the darker things that's going on, and I think that's a really strong aspect of film. But as I was watching it, I just thought there's so many references. So obviously Ty West did a film about Jonestown, which I've not seen, but I have heard people talk about, and I thought that sign, the farm sign, was so Jonestown, like at the end of the lane, and what's it called, like Gunpowder Farm or something, and it just made me think straight away about that, that archway leading into Jonestown. And then even like Pearl herself, she's very Baby Jane. She's got bows in her hair. She's got big flouncy sleeves. It's like this real callback to that sort of childlike monstrosity that I love so much in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I mean, it's one of my favourite films. So I might be drawing inferences that other people don't agree with. Maybe I want to see Baby Jane everywhere.
No, I totally agree with that.
But even
I agree. Like the manicness in her character is like really reminiscent of Baby Jane. I agree.
Yeah, and then last one that I sort of really picked up on was like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, particularly at the end, that sort of macabre feast at the end. And, they're all sitting there and it just reminded me so much of that dining room scene of Texas Chainsaw. And I thought it's nice to see a filmmaker being so overt in the references. I like to see, see influence and not trying to hide it as though every film everybody makes is totally original and unique. Like we're all just a soup, aren't we? We're a super as experiences. So I did notice that, and I thought that were a really nice sort of layer to it.
Yeah, that's kind of. I mean, it really. I mean, I thought I think the whole trilogy anyway is kind of an ode to cinema and filmmaking, right? And love for movie. I love that the alligator is called Theda after Theda Barra, and actually she is referenced later on in the film because I think the cinema plays Cleopatra. That was released that year. So it's kind of like all those little Easter eggs that I love. But the like I said, the whole trilogy really is around filmmaking. I think X was very much about the process of filmmaking. I think this one is very much about actors and their process as well, and kind of like poking fun a little bit at what happens in the psyche of actors and their desperate need for recognition and for being seen. So I mean obviously there's a lot of themes that that are thrown into Pearl, but I kind of love that he plays with that a little bit. Yeah,
I mean I have to say as well, and don't castigate us listeners, but I wasn't a massive fan of X. And I think the reason why we both share a similar reasons, I should say, for dislike. Yeah, I feel like dislike's too strong a word. I feel that Pearl is, again, I don't want to say a better film, but I think with X, I was very disappointed by the ending of it and how it sort of seemed to go directly against where they'd been establishing Pearl as a character all the way through. But again, beautifully shot, It's something I think I would need to think deeper about it. And I think it'll be interesting once Maxine comes out to see it as a sort of trilogy of films. And I did see that they've released a little teaser trailer for Maxine. And
I know, I'm really excited for that.
And I am really excited because I was thinking, obviously Pearl's origin story, we sort of know the end. So we know going back that, there's going to be something that's tipping her into violence. But with Maxine, it's sort of like the opposite because she's been pushed into this violence and how is that going to evolve? So I am interested to see it. And also it's set in 1985, I think, which I love the 80s in Hollywood, the excess and the glamour. So, but I mean, that sort of that idea about glamour and Hollywood and, stars in your eyes is a common thread throughout all three, like you've said, and particularly in Pearl, like she's so desperate for that recognition, isn't she, and that fame. And I think she's a very interesting character.
I think she is interesting, and it's great to get it. First of all, I mean, I love that we live in an age where we get villains' origin stories, because it's so it's really great to be able to tell the stories from that side. But also, I mean, what I didn't particularly love about X is that her character felt very one-dimensional.
Yeah.
So to then go back and to realize like what a really profound character she is. And I mean, now I've read that people, I don't know, quite a lot of criticism about the not the way she's written, but kind of the way she's acting, and people are kind of like, you get a sense that she's crazy and this and that, but actually I think it goes really, really deep into the reasons for her being pushed over the edge, and and acting the way she does. So yeah, in that sense, it kind of made me want to go back and watch X, because you get to look at that character in a completely different way.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think it just adds that depth to it, doesn't it, that you could. Because I think I've been sort of trying to thinking. I was thinking about it today and coming at it a bit more from a sort of psychologist sort of lens, and I think that there's this real. I mean, there's sort of an implication that perhaps. She's never sort of diagnosed with anything. People just say she's strange. She makes people feel uncomfortable. And I do feel sorry for her in them moments, because no one can tell her why. They just say, you make me feel weird. You're weird. And it's such an alienating place to be told by people around you that you're weird, but they can't tell you why, so you can't not be weird, whatever that means to them. And I did really feel for her in that, and it made me just think about, all the women who have pushed against boundaries, who have refused to accept mundane drudgery, a life of service to others, and who are labelled as mad or, unstable. Or, and it that is the very sad core of it, I think. I mean, I did see today that it were labelled as a slasher. And I suppose it is, but I don't think it is. I think that reduces it.
It's an accident. It's an incidental slasher, right?
Yeah,
accidental slasher. I would say like it's definitely not. That's not. That's not where you should watch it for sure.
No, to me, the horror of it is very much like something like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. It's the horror of a dream destroyed and a life that isn't what you want it to be, and Absolutely. That is such a relatable horror. I think such a. Something that we've all felt at some point, I'm sure. And there were moments for me, I don't know about for you, but there were moments of very uncomfortable recognition when, she were like, well, why not me? What have I done? Why have I got this? And, I think we've all felt like that, haven't we? Like, why is this me? Why can't I get this opportunity? Or why have I been landed with this? Or, and it's very, very human.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the fact, so it's set in 1918, and so it's like I think it's like 68 years before X takes place. So if it's apparently supposedly about 16 years old, I guess, in that film then. So to call her emotionally immature, as I've read in some review, it's kind of really BS in my opinion. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I also had crazy unrealistic ambitions when I was 16, and I didn't murder anyone as a result, but but yeah, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like I just as you said, is there are some really uncomfortable moments that we can really relate to, that idea of being people asking you to accept a reality that actually you should be allowed to to live and live out your ambitions, even if it's for them to not be realized. And she has this conversation with her mum at one point, and to say to her, let me do this, and if I'm no good at it and if it doesn't work out, then at least I know I will have tried. But she's not even given that opportunity, so it's kind of it's heartbreaking, really.
Well, it is, and I think as well what makes it doubly heartbreaking is it's such a small dream. It's a church troupe. It's such a small dream, but it shows how small a life has become. you know, that she's willing to destroy her life over that, over a chance, over an audition for a church troupe, because she's so like pent up in this farm. And I think relationship between her and her mum is very interesting and complicated. And I think, you know, I was watching it and I was sort of thinking, God, her mum's awful, isn't she? And then as I got, you know, as you sort of moving through film, I started to think, well, actually, her mum's probably acting out her absolute fear about, because obviously she's German, and we know that they've faced a lot of
anti-German
hostility, and so she probably thinks, I don't want her out there in the world where somebody could hurt her just because she happens to be my daughter. And
there's also that sense that she wants to protect her as well, that she's aware that Pearl is,
and she's odd,
you know, can be seen as a strange, that she's odd and that people will not get her. But she says to her, you know, at one point, one day you'll understand that getting what you want isn't what's important, making the most of what you have is. And of course, you know, that's you know, that's you know, excuse the pun, pearl of wisdom, you know, that comes back word for word, you know, at the end of the film. You know, that horrible acceptance that well, you know, this is who I am, and this is the, you know, the cards I've been dealt. So,
and this is what,
make the most of that.
This is what I've got, and you know, it's. But also, I think I really felt sorry for her mum, you know, because she didn't want Pearl to leave, obviously, because then she'd be trying to run a farm on her own, looking after a seriously, you know, ill husband, isolated, no friends because everybody's, you know, anti-German because of war. And I felt really sorry, and I think that is an element that were quite sensitive, like sensitively done, I thought, to a point. I felt at first like a mum, I was thinking, oh God, you're so awful, stop making her go and, you know, let her just do a dance practice and then she can shovel pig shit. Like, there's time for these things. And there's this like rigid, you know, like a bit like not as extreme as Carrie's mum, but that rigidity.
Yeah, I was going to mention Carrie's mum,
like, you do this now because I've said it's now. No flexibility.
Yeah.
But then you sort of start to understand that as you move through film, that there's a reason for that.
Exactly. I wonder how much the influence of Mia Goth helping with the writing of this film kind of influenced the development of those, you know, of the female characters in it. Because you say it's exactly that. I did, you know, when she first appeared in the film, you know, instantly I thought, you know, Carrie's mom as well. But actually, as the film developed, and when you get, you know, that the mom gets to tell her, you know, her own backstory, and you know, when she, you know, says, "Did you think this is what I wanted?" You know, for, you know, you. I mean, we never it's never really discussed what exactly happened to her dad, but you know, you get, you know, it's obviously, you know, suffered a stroke or, you know, something similar, and you know, that so that they are both, you know, full-time carers for him. So, but you know, you get the idea that her mum also had her shattered dreams, basically, that she wasn't allowed to live the life that she wanted, and you know, she's kind of resigned to. It's almost like she wants to crush Pearl's dreams because she doesn't want her to suffer the same disappointment she did.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. And I think, you know, on the other side of it, there is also probably a jealousy of, you've got the freedom I will never have again. It's that thing about how, what's that saying about mothers represent all that might come to be and daughters represent all that never will, and like that's where this tension can come from in mother-daughter relationships, because in daughters mothers see all potential, and in mothers, I suppose, or in this case at least with Pearl, she very much sees all that her worst nightmare and actually says to her, I just don't want to end up like you, which, oh God, I mean, it's true. And she, you know, but when she says it, you think, oh God, here we go. And then obviously chaos ensues, but it's that tension. And I think as well, you know, I mean, we're going to have to mention the absolute heartrending monologue at the end, you know, that is, I mean, it was so moving, you know, so just, just gets you, doesn't it?
Moving, disturbing. It's really, God, yeah.
So I suppose we've covered the, you know, the emotional, heartrending, lovely aspects of it. But let's get down to it, Clelia. Very rare is it that we see a woman with an axe. And what are your thoughts on the use of the axe throughout this film?
I mean, there's the pitchfork, there's the axe.
Yes.
I just think it's an inspirational story. No, I mean, no, but really, I mean, what I love about it actually is that the horror elements seem. I was going to say they seem less gratuitous than in X, for example. You know, it's it kind of. I feel like it's as a result of Pearl being so frustrated and feeling rejected. By the world, by people, that she ends up having those outbursts and committing those atrocious acts. But yeah, I think it's also done in such a. I don't know, in such a relatable way. Sound like such a psychopath, I know, but like the scene with the projectionist, sorry. I really felt for her in that moment. When she starts to understand that he's being freaked out and he's trying to make his exit and he's not being fully honest about what's happening, and you can feel her frustration mounting because she doesn't have those filters. She doesn't she's not someone who is going to pick up on those social cues. It's like, what have I done wrong? Why you obviously lied to me. You said you were going to whisk me away and take me to Europe, and all of a sudden you can't wait and leave me, and I'm not going to let this happen. And I have to say, I did root for her in that moment. It's like, for me, it's like it's a good for her moment. Like, yeah. Don't let him get away with that.
And I think it's as well like that rejection after the sort of, well, you've got what you wanted, which, to be fair, I don't necessarily think were true. I don't think it were that he always intended to just drop her off and never see her again. But then, she was behaving very strangely, and then he came in house and like, oh, here's my dad, and he was like, whoa, what? Like, you're married. And I felt for him a little bit in that, because I thought this is a lot to be sort of just confronting someone with. But then equally, I think when, as she gets that frustration, as she's saying, just be honest with me. And it's a recurring theme, I think, throughout film, is her saying to people, just tell me the truth. But then obviously as soon as they tell the truth, she sort of puts a pitchfork through them.
She hates the truth, exactly.
So it's a bit, I mean, I did wonder about that, actually. I think that was my biggest, not quandary with it. I suppose my question would be, do you think our sort of reaction to Pearl is designed to be quite morally ambiguous? And is that problematic? Should we be feeling one way or another, or do we need that complexity?
No, I think it is great that he makes us feel morally ambiguous, because I think, like, again, in the sequel, then you just very well what you stand. When it comes to when it comes to her, kind of like, she's the evil hag, right? She needs to be. She doesn't get to have sexual desire. She must be destroyed, and she's evil. But in this one, it's kind of it's almost like turning the mirror on us, right? And be like, if we look at her. Her situation, if we can relate to her in some respect, so does that make her entirely evil? And it's like, at the end, it's kind of, as you said, is she's her reactions to things, like she's like, be honest with me, but then she obviously can't take it. She can't stand people bursting her bubble, basically. But also, I don't know. I think you do feel for her. I think by the end of the film, you still feel. I don't know. I feel very very, very emotionally attached to her for some reason.
No, but I think like when she has the audition and she's making a scene, and I were really pleased that she were making a scene, because that there's that woman there going, oh, come on now, be good, don't spoil it. And I thought, how many women have heard, don't make a scene, don't spoil it, and internalised it and been quiet and not let that rage out. And I think to see someone just letting it out. I mean, that is very cathartic, I think.
It was,
yeah.
It's a beautiful moment in the film. I think she's a star, Meg.
I'm a
She's
star. I'm a star. You know, very,
Yeah.
very Sunset Boulevard. But it's and you know, her reaction to things, although extreme. And I'm not saying, you know, pitchforks through people are the way to go, but I think when she gets, she's quick to express herself, like in anger, in emotion, in tears and stuff. And I think it's refreshing to see that, because women are conditioned from childhood to keep yourself, you know, don't make a scene. If you do anything, it's just crying softly in a corner. Don't be angry. Don't be, you know, and it's very toxic. So I think it's nice to see someone going, actually, fuck that. If I want to scream, I'm screaming. And she does scream a lot.
Exactly.
I mean, Mia Goth's throat must have been destroyed after this
scream queen. Yeah, but also, you know, in terms of, you know, when we look at the origin of monstrosity for, or, you know, the origin of evil for, you know, female characters in horror, I think we never given that much detail about it, or, you know, reasons that are outside of, you know, women scorned, or... You know, just like, you know, she's evil because her mother was evil with her. You know, with Pearl, there is, you know, there's so much more there. It's like, it's not rooted to one single element. It is, you know, she's just, you know, angry at the world that won't give her what she believed, what, you know, she really believes that she is better than this, that she deserves, you know, to be loved. I mean, she yearns to be loved so much, and it's that corrosive need that, you know, there's been expressed there. And I love how it's being, you know, reflected in, you know, in the rot, you know, of the, you know, in the second half of the film, everything starts rotting, you know, rotting away. And it's kind of like, it's almost like, you know, the way it's eating at her is like, you know, coming out.
And that's, totally. I mean, I totally agree. I think that's a really amazing sort of encapsulation of it, because that is what's happening. She is just totally breaking down and not... And it's becoming much harder. Obviously, she's kept this lid on everything, sort of. Like, you know, her mum says, oh, I've seen you when you think no one's watching. Obviously, she's been, you know, there's been sacrifices more than Mr. Goose. But she can keep it. It's sort of been kept under control, but pressure is mounted on her. And she's just absolutely incapable now of keeping a lid on it. And that
keeping
is...
Keeping it in, hiding it.
Yeah, and that is always... I mean, you see that in other films, and I always think seeing characters when they've got to that like breaking point of how much can they stand and they can't stand anymore, and then what happens on the other side of that, I always think is really interesting. And I feel it's like she's kicking against society, and I don't think you can criticize her for that, particularly then, you know. Not much better now, really, if we're honest. But you know, but just for her to kick against it and go, this is not acceptable. I will not settle. I will not accept, and I will not settle for this, is really powerful.
And I stand for that. I like the fact that one thing we haven't touched on yet is the fact that it's set in 1918 during the Spanish flu and influenza. And obviously the film was written in isolation during COVID. So, you know, again, I was kind of like, that's, you know, I really like, you know, that they've done that. But it's also a reflection, right, on that isolation and how it can push people over the edge, which is very, you know, it's a great... you know, it's a great point of reference for our time as well, because again, I think that's one reason why Pearl is such a relatable character as well, because we kind of like, oh shit, you know what, I get it. Like, I nearly went fucking crazy during COVID and lockdown as well. So, you know, girl, I'm with you.
Yeah, but that's it, and it is really clever to set it then, and that idea about, you know, that there's disease creeping in, but then also like there's some in Pearl disease, like some, like you said, rotten in Pearl that's leaching out, and like this, a mum's like trying to contain everything, trying to keep Pearl and this like darkness inside her contained, but also keep world out so that this disease don't, you know, and this illness don't come in. And that idea about contagion, I think, is really interesting in it, and how, you know, that but again, isolation. So Pearl is probably a little bit odd because she's been trapped on this farm and not really had a chance to like socialise. and be around people. And it does. I mean, it makes you think of like Misery. How she's just isolated in that place, and she's gone strange. It
really shows right in the scene where with her sister-in-law, when her sister-in-law comes and the mum brings that whole pig. Actually, that was another point. So before I forget, I don't know if you noticed, but really picked up on the fact that obviously it's during the war, and there is that that sense of working hard because things are sparse, but actually there is an abundance of food in the first half of the film. And a lot of the film takes place around that dinner table. But in the first half of the film, you get that that clearly clear abundance of film, and then from the halfway point, then you start getting the food rotting away, and as we talked about already. But sorry, to go back to my original point, when the sister-in-law visit and the way the way Pearl interacts with her, you can see that Pearl is it's almost like she's aware that her social standing is well below that of a sister-in-law. So her demeanor is like really shy and just really wanting to make a good impression around her and really wanting to be to be accepted by her, or that she really values what that person think. I don't know if you make anything about her relationship with with the other people that she meets in the film.
I mean, I think that class element, I mean, surprise, I'm picking up on class element. But
I'll set you up for it.
Oh, you're sly, Clelia, you're sly. I think that, that idea that, and she talks about it at end, that idea that she saw Howard, is it? Yeah. Howard's her husband, yeah. I'm rubbish with names. This is going to be a recurring theme. But she said, I saw you and I picked you because I thought you'd take me away from all this. And then he's play acting at being poor, being a farmer, and he can leave any time he wants, but he's kept her there. And that resentment and that hatred of him, and the fact that he could have not gone to war, but he went and he left her. And, all very rational feelings, I think, very justifiable feelings. But this idea that she thought she'd done the right thing by marrying well, which is what women were always told to do: marry well, marry better, marry blah, blah, blah. And she'd done it and it had still not worked. And you feel that for her, that she's tried at every turn to she get
works so
away.
hard, to escape her reality.
And she just keeps dropping straight back in. It's like Groundhog Day. It's just every day wakes up on this farm. And, that eats away, doesn't it? I think it's... So she is... What she does, obviously she's pitchforking and axing people, and we're not condoning serial murder on this podcast. But
I love that can I just say I just love that you've used pitchfork as a verb. We are pitchforking.
But I think
fantastic.
she's a very, like, you can, if not justify, understand. I feel like you can understand her. You can understand that frustration. You can understand that bitterness, that desperate need to be anywhere else. Like it's very, very relatable. And I think that is interesting. I mean, we talked about moral ambiguity and stuff, and I think it is an interesting thing, right? And I do think we have a lot of films have done that, moved away from this good versus evil thing into much more grey. And I think that does it provokes a lot more thought when, like you've said, when you can sort of identify with that person a little bit. You're like, oh, well, can't be all bad then. Ooh. Maybe I'm a bit like Pearl. I watched it thinking, oh shit, God, if I'd have been there, I might have been. I probably want to kill Mr. Goose. I mean, Mr. Goose, what poor sacrifice, Poor Mr. Goose.
You walked in the wrong theatre, Mr. Goose.
Yeah, silly Mr. Goose.
Not ready for the audience.
But I did think it was clever how it tied to X, that idea about, she weren't young enough, she weren't blonde enough. Even though you said she were meant to be like 16 and she weren't young enough, I thought, geez, what you looking for here?
I know.
But, that idea, again, you can see how that's sort of the poison thread in it that runs then through into X, about when she is older and she is again confronted by younger women have got sexual freedoms, who are doing what they want to do, who've got this independence. And I thought that were a really interesting way to sort of pull that thread together, to tie it together with first two films.
Absolutely. Yeah. Also explains why in X she ends up throwing that young blonde girl to the alligator and takes her shine to Maxine.
Yeah.
What did you make, talking of being relatable, and I know that people will be like, how do you find that relatable? But what do you make of the end credit? Because actually I just it was
smiling
through the tears.
It was brilliant. I mean, again, that like Sunset Boulevard, Baby Jane, which are two of my absolute favourite films, but this idea about putting that face on, grotesque, the mask slipping and desperately trying to shove it back on, and you can see her doing that. And the fact that it kept going all through credits as well, you thought it were going to be a couple of seconds, and then I stayed to watch it all, and I was like, oh God, I was getting more and more uncomfortable. I was like, oh, is it going to finish?
Yeah. I did think I was at the strength that you must have taken from her to keep like.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. How do you feel Howard felt?
Oh God. I mean, what were Howard doing? I mean, actually, I did think that. Is her husband in X, Howard? Is it same guy? Or is it?
Yeah, it's the same guy.
Oh, well, so, because I was thinking, so obviously he were fine with it.
Yeah, I just love the fact that he came back and she had staged,
oh God, yeah,
that little dinner party for him. Like, I really want to be privy to the conversation that took place after that.
I did feel like that were a big gap actually, because then obviously we know that he must have stayed, so obviously he didn't have a problem with it. So maybe there'll be a fourth film and it'll be like them in middle age or something, and we'll see that they're like Texas Chainsaw Massacre family or something.
I'd like that.
But I do think, I think we need to touch on the scarecrow scene.
Yes.
Which is one of the most unusual, perhaps, and uncomfortable sex scenes I've ever seen committed to film. And I did think when I was watching it, you could not pay me enough as an actor to do this. So... Literally, there's not enough money in the world, not for a gold pig. I was going to say something really vulgar then, and I stopped myself. I forgot this weren't just us talking then.
Go on, it's not a PG podcast, you can go for it.
I was going to say, I won't freak myself off on a scarecrow for a gold pig.
I thought she really leaned into it, didn't she? I mean, she really leaned into that character full stop.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, actually, I heard a lot of people saying, how, that scene made them feel deeply uncomfortable. And yes, there's something that, I agree, but I am going to sound like a complete weirdo, but I think I have, I've kind of really confessed my love for Pearl, but there was something really, really touching as well about that scene. You're looking at me like, oh, what?
No, go on. Live and let live.
No, I mean, probably at the first half of that scene, I thought, when she starts dancing with it, and then she pictures that the projectionist and obviously go freaky on it, and then ends up shouting at it, I'm married. But I don't know, I did again, like, it was that moral ambiguity. And if you take into context that she is a really young, as we said, 16, 17-year-old girl, with probably raging hormones.
Oh, yeah.
Husband, at war, kind of abandoned her to go fighting in a nonsensical war, is... I don't know. I think he's, he kind of expressed something about female desire that, didn't make me feel, that uncomfortable, as uncomfortable as people have painted that scene to be. I was kind of like, I don't know. There was something really, really profound, I thought, actually, in that scene.
I think for me, I mean, I know obviously it's a stunt scarecrow, but I think it was more the idea of like, the all the Beatles and stuff that probably would have. Well, maybe adding to my revulsion. And that horrible head on it as well. Ugh. I kept waiting for Scarecrow to come to life. That's too much goosebumps as a kid. I kept waiting for it to come alive and, but yeah, I mean, that the idea about, female sexuality, and particularly Pearl's sexuality, is a thread that runs through both. And I'm sure, and sexuality again with Maxine, and I'm sure it's, it's going to run through into that third
and repression,
one.
Obviously, no? And repression was a good
Yeah.
one, which is why she ends up, shouting at it like, how dare
Yeah.
I'm married and like, how dare you take advantage of me?
Yeah, Scarecrow.
Inanimate object.
Mr. Scarecrow.
Mr. Scarecrow.
But yeah.
After Mr. Goose.
Yeah, Mr. Goose is gone. Mr. Scarecrow's a pervert. It's just, it's a nightmare. but I think, it is that. It is that idea about repression, and she's been forced constantly to repress herself in every way, not just sexually, but she's just forced to repress herself all the time. And, her husband's disappeared for months and she's living with her mum and her dad, and, it's not... and she's a young person, and I think it is good that were explored in it. That it did sort of. I'm going to say touch on that, but that's probably probably inappropriate.
Actually, to be fair, you know what? Probably the scene in the bath made me feel more uncomfortable than the scene with the Scarecrow.
Yes.
That was super, super uncomfortable. I was like, just turn there. I mean, that's like, okay, Dad is paralyzed and, you don't get a proper sense of how much he's able to respond to things, but you kind of like, just turn the wheelchair around. Like,
or,
still your dad.
Put him in his room again, or... like she's like, I didn't want to waste water. It's like, well, how long can it take to just put him in his room or another room? Like, and that were weird. But then I did think it spoke to that like naive childlikeness of her that I think even you see in X as well. This sort of like, she can't understand why a mum would be like, that's inappropriate. I don't think. It's uncomfortable, and I were uncomfortable when I saw it, but I don't think it don't read to me as like she were trying to be weird. It was just she was still acting like a child. It's like because she's like on this, so a mum treats her like a child and she behaves like a child in a lot of ways, but then she's like married and she's kicking against this and she wants her independence and to be autonomous, and there's like that conflict as well. She's like a child who wants to be an adult, but she is an adult. I suppose. Yeah. It is.
She has a weird relationship to sexuality anyway, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, not a weird, but I mean, as it kind of like very, innocent, childlike, almost like not... it's not very, those boundaries are not, clear cut in her head clearly. When the projectionist shows her, the porn film as well, she doesn't have her reaction is not, oh God, why are you showing me this? She's very much like, it feels like he's showing her a newsreel,
Yeah, she's like, what's that?
Matter of fact about.
Just like looking at, what's
exactly,
that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, all right, fair enough.
So then he goes to sense that, then I think he falls, it makes sense then that she's, exactly that she's very childlike, around her, around her dad in the bath as well. In that respect, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I making excuses for her? Maybe.
Well, who knows? But, I mean, I will say that this week was a little bit tougher on the old folklore corner. But...
You went for it as well. You still found an angle.
I still found an angle. So, my angle is that I was sort of looking at, sort of mythology around women, murderous women. And there are a few, but I did decide to settle on our personal saviour on this podcast, Medusa. And I'm sure people know, but just in case anyone's not familiar with Medusa, I will just give a little potted history. So Medusa was reported to be this very beautiful woman, although she has become synonymous with monstrosity. But after being raped by, I'm not sure if it was Neptune or Poseidon, maybe there's disagreement about whom in fact it was, in Athena's temple, she was victim blamed and punished by Athena, who transformed her hair into snakes and basically made it so that anybody who she looks at turned to stone, which doesn't do much for one's social life. Which obviously led to Medusa living, in a cave alone. But much like the vagina dentata myth that we've talked about in our second episode, so her story, even though ostensibly it's Medusa's story, it in fact centres on the hero, and again, multiple air quotes around that, Perseus, who was the avenging hero who came into a cave and cut a head off and then used it as a weapon to turn people to stone. So that is a very short-potted history of Medusa. And I would like to point out that I do say that she was raped because that has been the sort of more modern reading of the text around Medusa, which does make her treatment even more horrible. Because she's the one who was blamed for this violence and punished by Athena. But what's interesting is that she has been reclaimed as a feminist icon, really, and you know, one of my heroes, and I know one of yours as well, Clelia.
She's definitely our mascot for this season as well, so we love her.
Yeah, and she has become a symbol of female rage, actually, which I think is very fitting with this podcast. And in fact, the authors of the book Female Rage, Unlocking Its Secrets, Claiming Its Power, did say that all the women they interviewed for the book, when asked what rage looked like, did describe Medusa, although they couldn't remember the details of the myth, but they all talked about, you know, the snaky-haired, furious Medusa. And, you know, I think, as I've said, when we read it through a feminist lens, it is a really horrible and tragic story. But Elizabeth Johnston has called her the original nasty woman. You know, much was made about Hillary Clinton being a nasty woman. And she was often compared to Medusa through the campaign. But it's been said by Elizabeth Johnston that Medusa is this nasty woman who haunts Western imagination and materialises whenever male authority feels threatened by female agency. And I thought that, again, was interesting if we think about Pearl, who, you know, she is viewed as monstrous by a society that doesn't understand her. And if we take away this murderous side that we've talked about for a minute and actually think about her dissatisfaction with this life that she's got, this drudgery and, you know, servitude and in service to others and never allowed to fulfill her dreams, her desires are understandable and her rage is understandable. And much like Medusa, I think if we look at Pearl through a lens of her reclaiming her own rage and her own power, you know, she is also, I suppose, a powerful symbol for what that looks like for women. And again, you know, with the caveat that I'm not suggesting we all go out axe murdering and pitchforking. But yes, I did manage to get the angle that I wanted in on the photo. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, Clelia. Do you think I've just shoehorned that in?
No, at all. I mean, we talked about it a little bit before recording that episode, and no, I think it's a very valid comparison to make, actually, and a proof that once again we can relate everything to myth and folklore. Not that we're trying hard to do that at all, but I think it's it adds even more depth, I think, to to the story and to the themes that are running through the film. So yeah, I just think it's a very interesting point to bring up.
Yeah. Oh, well, I am glad, because I mean, I had any opportunity to talk about Medusa, to be honest. But I do think that reclaiming of her as a symbol of rage, and so rage becoming an acceptable and an understandable part of women's existence, I think, is important. And to have a character like Pearl, as the protagonist of a film rather than just a side character, perhaps, to have her front and center and her rage be front and center, and to really see that visceral rage in her, is very powerful, and it does speak to that sort of myth. I always think, this idea that Medusa's rage turned people to stone, and but when you actually look at what led her to live in this cave, isolated and alone, and referred to as a monster. She's a victim. And I do think that you can read Pearl in that way, as a victim of circumstance and of society and a
product of our own society as well. It's like it's almost it's the world around her that's made her monstrous.
Absolutely. And that's I think a really good way to look at it, that she has, rather than some other characters that we've I suppose it, much like Ginger is made monstrous by a lycanthrope, Pearl is made monstrous by patriarchy. By the patriarchy.
Yeah. Exactly. And this is the scariest monster of them all.
Exactly.
In this season.
So, what about film recommendations then, Clelia? What would we recommend people to watch after Pearl?
Well, there's quite a few titles came to mind actually watching the film. One that we've both talked about, and we kind of wanted to give a little bit more context around, is Lizzie, the film inspired by the real life case of Lizzie Borden.
Yes.
I don't know if you wanted to give a listener a bit more context around that, but Pearl basically, I mean, as soon as I started watching the film and that first scene with the pitchfork, I was like, definitely we've got a new Lizzie Borden here.
Yes. Well, I mean, Lizzie Borden is one of the most, I would say, in fact, arguably the most famous case of axe murder, I would suggest. And most people know at least the name, and Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her father 40 whacks. And it's a very interesting one, and there's loads of really interesting books actually about the case and stuff. But yeah, essentially, very privileged young white woman, and I'm mentioning that because I've got a contrasting case that I came upon in my research today, who was accused of the murder of her mother, a father and a stepmother, who were found bludgeoned to death with an axe. There were a big case at the time, a lot of publicity, a lot of press, and it went to trial, and she was, as I recall it, she was acquitted, I believe.
Acquitted, yeah. She got away with it.
She got away with it, and then basically bought a house and lived, I think, in the same town for the rest of her life, which has got some gumption, really. And so they made the film about it, and I've not seen it actually. Which I still need to see it. But I believe that don't they play up the angle that she might have been having an affair with the maid? Are they doing?
That's right.
Yeah, because the maid was a bit of a shady character witness at the time. So that might be where that comes from.
That's exactly. But I really recommend this one though. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely go and seek it out. Chloe Sevigny is fantastic in it.
Yes, no, I will watch it. But the case I came across today that I'd thought was also very interesting is the case of Clementine Barnabet. So starting in 1909, there were a string of murders that would haunt the towns along the South Pacific Railroad from Texas to Louisiana. Oh, I started it very dramatically there.
Close to home. But for Pearl, I mean, not for us.
Yes. But basically, entire families were being killed in the homes with an axe. And between 1911 and 1912, more than a dozen families were murdered. And the thing that set this case apart is all the families that were targeted were black families living in rural or poorer areas. And initially, a man called Raymond Barnabet, Clementine's father, was arrested. And indeed, Clementine and her brother did testify against him. But suspicion quickly shifted to Clementine and her brother after the murders continued while her father was in prison. So eventually, these murders were tied to this small religious group known as the Church of Sacrifice. And there was the suggestion that voodoo was involved, and that these people were being murdered for human sacrifice. And eventually, Clementine did confess to 35 murders, and she was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 19. I mean, we don't need to go into...
God.
Well, yes. I mean, it's quite a shocking case. But we don't need to go into all the factors that would motivate someone at 19 to confess to murders when in police custody. But, it was always in doubt whether she'd done it or not, and indeed police didn't really believe her, but they pinned it on her anyway. And so she went to prison, whatever the truth, whether she were involved or not. And then while she were in prison, she was labelled a pervert, and then had some shady medical procedure that apparently fixed her, quote unquote. Now, no one ever could dig out what this treatment was. It wasn't a lobotomy because they didn't come in until about a decade later. But something happened, they did some procedure to her that fixed her, and then she was released and sort of disappeared into obscurity. But there were really heavy racist and misogynist overtones to this story. And basically, as soon as voodoo were mentioned and the fact that Clementine and her family were all black parishioners of this church, and voodoo were mentioned, basically racism, as it almost always does, took over, and no real further investigation were needed. But reason why I thought that were an interesting one is to think about that in comparison to Lizzie Borden, who was found in the house with the axe and the dead bodies and said, I sort of did it, but I didn't do it, and then basically never did a day in prison. And then you've got this 19-year-old, young woman from a sort of poor background. She's, facing a racist, corrupt police force. And she's confessing to crimes, but it's all really strange and not really enough detail. So I thought that was a depressing but interesting comparison to make between two
white
apparent
privilege.
Yes, exactly. Two apparent axe murderers. And the third axe murderer I would like to mention is someone I did a paper on when I did my forensic masters, who was called the Axeman of New Orleans. Yes. Yeah. Never solved. That's all I'll say. Look it up, people, but never solved. But with a name like the Axeman of New Orleans, I think, no wonder the case lives in infamy. A little true crime corner there.
I was going to say, we follow us for more true crime podcast. The Axeman of New Orleans is covered in, it's really shortly in only one episode of one season of American Horror Story. They touch on it.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
That was a really true crime moment.
Yes. Axe murderers. Not many women axe murderers, so we have to, when we have examples. But did you have any other any other films that you would recommend?
Not recommending people to take to the axe, but a couple more recommendations, and I saw this one a couple of days ago, and actually I thought it would be a good fit because, talking about that, isolation and the psychosis that people can, develop as a result of being isolated, of being bullied by, by the world around them, is the film Sissy that's available on Shudder. Have you seen it?
It's on my list. It's been on my list for ages. Yeah. And I've seen trailer for it.
Bump it up.
Yeah. Oh, I will.
Bump it up the list. So it directed and written by Hannah Barlow and Kane Scenes. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing this right, but I did find it a really interesting watch, and actually watching it right after seeing Pearl made me think, yes, there's a lot of crossovers there that I found really interesting, and really recommend this one. And the last one I was thinking about was watching Pearl is Saint Maud.
Oh yeah.
Again, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, but there is a lot of, all those films are kind of character studies basically. So and I find that really interesting. Again, kind of Pearl made me, realize why. Not that I had any doubt, but it kind of it's a good reminder of why horror is such an interesting genre, because there are films that like this that can come out of the genre, and that makes you reevaluate horror as a genre. You know, people think of horror as being just one thing, and I know that people get pissed off with the label of elevated horror for lots of many reasons. I'm not going to go into it now, but you know, horror really is an umbrella term, and there is so many possibilities with it. And to have a film like Pearl and like Sissy, like Saint Maud coming out of it is really, it just makes it so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going high camp first, to a point. I mean, obviously we've talked about Baby Jane. Would definitely recommend Sunset Boulevard. But I would also recommend Straight Jacket, in which Joan Crawford is wielding an axe. And that's a really brilliant, again, that idea about, you know, unreliable narrator and a woman who's transgressed society's sort of boundaries and everything else, and that's brilliant. I mean, I love Bette Davis and Joan Crawford anyway, so if I can shoehorn one of their films in. And then I also thought about Possession, actually, with that idea about a woman refusing to conform to what society, refusing to be palatable and, you know, acceptable. And I thought that were a really good example of that. I mean, obviously we love Possession on this podcast. And then last one I sort of thought about was The Haunting, from, is it 1963? The original Haunting of Hill House film adaptation, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And that again, that idea about, you know, being sort of corrupted from the inside sort of thing, and you know, isolation and loneliness, and I think they're really, really well encapsulated in that film. I mean, anything by Shirley Jackson, you're gonna get that. That's, you know. And I've been reading a lot of Patricia Highsmith lately, actually, and I just finished Edith's Diary, which is one of the saddest and most depressing books I've ever read. But again, that put me in mind after watching Pearl, like that idea about, you know, women refusing, sort of putting on that idea about being put upon. So book recommendations now we're moving into. We've moved away even from film. But, you know, like a woman being put upon by everybody around her and it just slowly driving her, you know, to madness and to despair. Like, I think that is a good, if you're more of a reader, perhaps, definitely give Edith's Diary a read if you want your week to be ruined. So, thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh. Please join us next time for more discussion about women in horror. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can find out more about our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. Keep your eyes peeled for those, everyone. We'd love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels. And also, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. But until next time, creep it weird, everyone!